You're too old to handle anything anymore, Dad. Maybe it's time you just leave. I froze in the marble-floored hallway of my own house in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Those words, coming from my own daughter and her husband, hit me harder than the winter wind outside. The room smelled faintly of pine from the Christmas tree we'd put up the week before, but the warmth of family was gone, replaced by the cold sting of betrayal. I'm George Walters. I built this house, brick by brick, in my own way. After 40 years of working the night shifts at the local steel plant and then managing a construction company that put food on our table and sent my kids to college without loans. And now, the people I sacrificed for, the ones I trusted, were telling me I was nothing but a burden. I looked at them. My daughter Emily, once a bright-eyed girl who clung to my hand in the grocery store aisles, now smirking with that self-satisfied arrogance that comes from thinking money makes you invincible. And her husband, Carl, with his tailored suit and smug grin, acting as if he owned every corner of my house. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to make them understand how deeply they'd cut me. But I stayed silent, calm. I had to, because I knew any rash action would play right into their hands. For years, I had quietly given them everything: my savings, my time, my energy. I fixed their first car, co-signed their first mortgage, and even bailed them out when Carl's business ventures failed spectacularly. And this was my reward. I sank into the worn leather armchair in the study, staring at the photographs lining the shelves. Pictures of Emily as a toddler with cookie dough smeared on her cheeks, the first day of school, Christmas mornings with bright paper hats and wide-eyed wonder. How had it come to this? How had love and family loyalty turned into contempt? I breathed deeply, letting the air from the fireplace fill my lungs. It was time to think, not react. Every man has a breaking point, and mine had been tested tonight. But I wasn't done, not by a long shot. Before I continue, if you're new here, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. I decided to walk through the rooms I had built with my own hands, every board nailed, every wall painted, every light fixture chosen with care. It all reminded me that I wasn't powerless. They may have thought they could push me aside, tell me I belonged in a nursing home, but they hadn't accounted for the quiet knowledge I carried. The deeds, the bank accounts, the control I still held over the assets they assumed were theirs. Emily laughed from the kitchen, chatting casually with Carl about a dinner party they were planning next week. "Dad should just sit in that old chair all day," she said, almost casually. "We'll manage everything from here." Their words were daggers, but they also lit a fire in me. I remembered my years of sacrifices, the nights I spent working extra shifts, the weekends spent fixing the roof during rainstorms, the holidays spent scraping ice off their car so they could get to school. I had built this family and this house from nothing, and I would not be discarded without consequence. I pulled out my phone and started jotting notes. Mortgages, property deeds, bank accounts, insurance policies. I wasn't going to fight with anger. I would fight with precision. I would make them see, in a way they could not ignore, that betrayal has a price. I poured a glass of bourbon and sat by the window, watching the snow fall over the Cedar River. The town slept, oblivious to the storm brewing inside my house. And as I sipped the drink, a plan began to form. Slowly, deliberately, perfectly. They thought they had all the power. But power, as I would soon show them, isn't about who holds the silver spoons or who laughs the loudest at dinner parties. It's about knowing where the truth lies and using it with patience, precision, and timing. And the truth, as they would soon discover, was mine. The first step had been set, though they had no idea. Their arrogance would be their downfall, and my revenge, my reclaiming of dignity, would start quietly, but it would not be small. The next morning, the air in Cedar Rapids was crisp and biting, the kind that cuts through your coat and rattles your bones. I walked past the snow-covered lawns, my boots crunching on the ice-laced sidewalks, thinking about the events of last night. Emily and Carl were convinced I was powerless, that my age and patience made me weak. But weakness, I reminded myself, is often underestimated. Breakfast was a tense affair. Emily set the table with all the precision of a military operation, perfectly aligned plates, gleaming silverware, and a centerpiece that practically screamed, "Look how successful we are without him." Carl poured his coffee with the smugness of a man who believes he's won. But I watched silently, like a predator waiting for the right moment. "Morning, Dad," Emily said, not even looking at me. Her tone was polite but cold, a courtesy that felt more like an insult. "Morning," I replied, voice steady, measured. "Sleep well?" "Yes, thank you," she said, her eyes flicking toward the window as if to avoid my gaze. Carl smirked from across the table. "You should really think about moving to that assisted living place you mentioned. You'd be much more comfortable there." I sipped my coffee, letting the bitter liquid settle in my chest. Calm, patience, timing. That was my weapon. After breakfast, I left the house under the pretense of running errands. But my mind was busy in ways they would never suspect. I stopped by the county courthouse first, making discreet inquiries about property deeds, easements, and ownership rights. Every signature, every legal document I had ever touched was still in my favor. Carl and Emily assumed the house was theirs because they lived in it and paid the utilities. But ownership, true ownership, still rested with me. From there, I moved to the bank. I had accounts and investments that I'd quietly maintained over the years, accounts they had always thought were part of the family legacy. But I was the architect of that legacy, and it was time to remind them of that fact. I spoke with a bank officer I'd known for years, explaining my intentions to restructure some joint accounts. "I just want to make sure everything is properly documented," I said, letting the words sound innocuous. By the time I returned home, the snow had begun to melt slightly, leaving wet patches on the driveway. Emily was planting flowers along the front porch, an effort to show off control, to make the house hers. Carl was inside, fussing over the thermostat as if he were king of the castle. I paused at the threshold, taking in the scene. For a moment, I let the calm wash over me. I had a plan. They didn't see it coming, and when it happened, the shock on their faces would be priceless. "Dad, are you coming inside?" Emily called. Her voice carried that thin edge of annoyance I'd grown used to over the years. I smiled, faintly, almost imperceptibly. "In a moment," I replied. Instead of entering, I walked to the shed at the edge of the property, where I kept important papers and legal documents. Over the years, I had quietly organized every mortgage payment, insurance policy, and deed. I pulled out the files I needed, checked and double-checked every detail. Everything was in place. If I moved forward, there would be no way for them to fight back without exposing their own mismanagement, their arrogance, their greed. That evening, Emily and Carl invited friends over. A casual dinner party, pretending nothing had happened the night before. I watched from the study window, glass of bourbon in hand, as they laughed and toasted, oblivious to the storm brewing just behind the walls. And I realized something vital. They had spent so long thinking of me as weak, irrelevant, a relic of the past, that they had let their guard down completely. Their mockery, their dismissiveness, it was all ammunition for the steps I would take next. I took a final sip, letting the warmth of the bourbon settle into my chest. The night would come, and with it, the first move in a game they didn't even know we were playing. By the end of it, they would learn that dignity isn't handed over. It's claimed, sometimes with fire, sometimes with ice, and always with precision. As I put the glass down and looked out at the house, a single thought solidified in my mind. They had assumed I would fade away quietly, but I was just getting started. The next morning, the sun rose over Cedar Rapids with a pale, cold light, streaking the rooftops and the frost-lined streets. I moved with deliberate calm, every step measured, every action purposeful. Today wasn't about emotion. It was about precision. It was about taking back what was rightfully mine. I started at the lawyer's office, a modest brick building on 2nd Avenue I'd known since my first home purchase decades ago. My attorney, Mr. Halverson, a stoic man with gray temples and a sharp mind, greeted me with a knowing glance. "You're serious about this," he said, without preamble. "I've been serious for a long time," I replied, sliding a folder across the desk. It was thick, carefully organized, containing every deed, mortgage record, and financial statement I needed to reclaim control. "They think I'm irrelevant. They think I can't act. They're wrong," Halverson nodded, leafing through the documents. "Legally, you're untouchable. They've assumed ownership, but you hold the signatures, the title, and the rights. We can move on this quietly, or make it public. Your choice." I considered the man's words for a moment. Public or quiet? My gut told me quiet would be clean, controlled, but public would hit harder. Harder would teach them exactly who had the upper hand. I made my decision. "Public," I said finally. "I want them to feel the weight of this. Let everyone know the truth. Their friends, their neighbors, they all need to see what happens when arrogance meets reality." Halverson smirked, impressed. "Very well. We'll schedule a formal notice. And I'll prepare the foreclosure documents to serve tomorrow morning. I suggest you stay calm. Don't let them see what's coming." Calm. That was key. I reminded myself again. Emily and Carl thrived on chaos and spectacle. If I let them sense anticipation or anger, they would try to manipulate it. They needed to feel secure before the fall. Returning home, I parked in the garage and watched the house from my car. Emily's sports car gleamed in the driveway. Carl's expensive watch caught the light as he moved inside, tinkering with a device. Their lives were staged, rehearsed, the illusion of control tangible. And I would pull the rug out without warning. I spent the afternoon quietly, arranging my schedule, calling the bank one last time to confirm details, double-checking every paper, every clause. By 4 p.m., everything was set. The documents were ready, the notices drafted, the execution planned. That evening, I wandered through the small streets of Cedar Rapids, watching the locals, the shopkeepers, the diners bustling with early dinner crowds. Life went on, indifferent to my private war. But the town had always been my witness. Small towns remember. Small towns talk. And when the revelation came, it wouldn't just hit Emily and Carl. It would echo through every neighbor's conversation. By nightfall, I returned home, slipping inside as Emily and Carl hosted another gathering. Friends, neighbors, laughter, clinking glasses. They didn't see me in the hall, a shadow among the decorations, observing, calculating. I could almost taste the shock that would come. The humiliation they had no idea was imminent. I retired to the study, reviewing the final copies of the foreclosure notices and the ownership confirmation letters. Everything was in place. The timing, the method, the legal authority. One phone call tomorrow, and the letters would be served. Carl's arrogance, Emily's disdain. They had both assumed immortality in their comfort. I would teach them that power is fragile and respect is earned, not assumed. As I looked at the house through the study window, lights glowing warmly against the cold night, I felt a flicker of satisfaction. The first step was almost within reach. Soon, Emily and Carl would learn that a lifetime of mockery, disrespect, and condescension comes at a price. And I, the man they had dismissed, would collect it fully. But there was one final consideration: timing. I needed them unaware, unprepared. One mistake and the plan could falter. My patience had carried me this far. I would let it carry me all the way to the finish line. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon, swirling the amber liquid, thinking about the next morning. They would wake to a new reality, one that had been patiently waiting for them all along. And I smiled quietly, knowing that by this time tomorrow, the illusion of control they clung to so desperately would be shattered. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of my modest kitchen as I sipped my coffee, the steam rising like a signal of calm before the storm. Outside, the neighborhood stirred. The hum of engines, the chatter of early walkers, the familiar rhythm of Cedar Rapids waking up. Inside, I prepared for the confrontation that would tip the balance of my life and theirs. By 9 a.m., Halverson arrived with the stack of foreclosure notices, all properly signed and notarized. "Everything is in order," he said. "Once served, they have a limited window to respond, but the effect is immediate. Their mansion, your control. Are you ready for this?" I nodded, swallowing the tightness in my throat. "I've been ready for years. Today is just the day they face reality." We drove together to their neighborhood, a quiet street lined with well-manicured lawns and expensive SUVs. I could see Emily's sedan parked in the driveway, Carl's BMW next to it. Friends and neighbors waved as they walked their dogs or jogged by. No one suspected what was about to happen, except me. We parked a few houses down and walked up to the front door. I rang the bell once, twice. The door swung open, and there they were. Emily, with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes, and Carl, arms crossed, confident as always. "Morning," Emily said, feigning cheer. "What brings you here so early?" I met her gaze evenly. "I have some paperwork for you," I said, sliding the folder across to Halverson. Carl looked puzzled, hovering behind her. "What is this?" he asked, a trace of unease creeping into his voice. "Legal notices," Halverson said, his tone calm but firm. "You're being formally notified that ownership and mortgage responsibilities of this property revert back to Mr. Lawson. You have 30 days to vacate." For a moment, the room was silent, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Then Emily laughed nervously, thinking this was some kind of joke. "Dad, what is this? You can't be serious," she said, her voice rising, eyes darting between Carl and me. "Oh, I'm serious," I said, each word deliberate, measured. "You said I belonged in a nursing home. You mocked my years of work, my sacrifices, my life. Well, here's your reality check." Carl's face turned pale, his confident posture crumbling. This isn't legal. You can't just—" "I already have," I interrupted. The lawyer confirmed everything. Every signature, every clause, every rule has been followed. You assumed I was powerless, invisible. Today, that assumption ends. Emily stumbled backward, clutching the counter for support. You're ruining us," she whispered, disbelief shaking her voice. "No," I said softly but firmly. "You ruined yourselves. Your arrogance, your disrespect, it built the path you're standing on right now. I just followed the law, and patience, to its end." Neighbors began to notice the commotion, peeking from windows and doorways. Phones were already recording. I could see the first whispers of gossip forming on their front lawns. Their pride and social facade, carefully constructed over the years, was crumbling in real time. Carl turned to me, anger flashing, but it was thin, brittle. "You'll regret this, Dad, you hear me? We'll fight back. You can't win." "I already have," I said, feeling a quiet satisfaction as Halverson handed the documents to the delivery officer for official service. "And the best part? There's nothing you can do to stop it now." Emily sank into the nearest chair, her face a mix of shock and humiliation. Carl stormed out into the driveway, shouting curses I tuned out, knowing the damage was done. The reality of their loss had hit, and it was irreversible. I stepped back, letting the moment sink in. The mansion, the luxury, the years of dismissive behavior. It all belonged to me now. And, more importantly, they understood for the first time who I really was. As I walked away, Halverson at my side, I caught a glimpse of a neighbor recording everything on their phone, smiling knowingly at me. Word would spread through Cedar Rapids quickly. Their reputation, their pride, their assumed superiority, shattered. And in that quiet triumph, I realized something deeper. I hadn't just reclaimed property, I had reclaimed respect, dignity, and a long-overdue sense of peace. But even as I walked back to my car, I felt a flicker of anticipation. Emily and Carl might lose their mansion, but would they ever truly understand the lesson I'd delivered? That, I decided, was a story for the next chapter. The weeks that followed were surreal. Cedar Rapids buzzed with whispers and sideways glances. Every coffee shop, diner, and grocery line became a stage for speculation. Friends and acquaintances of Emily and Carl stopped returning their calls. Their social circle, so carefully curated, quietly dissolved under the weight of the story now circulating like wildfire. Meanwhile, I returned to my modest home, the quiet streets around it feeling warmer somehow. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acknowledgement. For the first time in years, the weight of resentment and embarrassment was lifted off my shoulders. I could breathe. The mansion they once flaunted as a symbol of their success now sat empty. A stark reminder of arrogance turned against itself. Halvorsen had advised me on managing it responsibly, putting it on the market, settling any outstanding taxes, ensuring the transfer was fully legal and above board. Everything was meticulous. Everything was fair. Everything was mine. I remember that Sunday morning vividly. I sat on my porch with a cup of black coffee, the scent of pine and freshly cut grass filling the air. I watched as a moving truck pulled up to the mansion. The crew, professional and unhurried, began hauling furniture and valuables out. Emily and Carl were nowhere in sight, having retreated into temporary apartments downtown. I let a slow smile cross my face, not out of spite, but out of justice. Every insult they'd hurled at me, every belittling remark about my age, my work, my life, had been returned to them in full measure. Not a single word had been wasted. Neighbors waved as I walked past, some nodding, others simply whispering. For years, I'd been the quiet man who kept to himself. But now, there was respect in their eyes. The quiet dignity I had maintained through decades of toil was finally visible to everyone. Later that afternoon, I received a call from a local attorney in Davenport. "Mr. Lawson, the property sale went smoothly. Your net proceeds are secure. You've handled everything perfectly." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, letting the warm sun wash over me. For so long, I had sacrificed, worked, and endured, always hoping that my children, my own flesh and blood, would understand. And now, in this moment, I realized something. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about reclaiming your own life, standing tall, and letting the truth speak for itself. Weeks turned into months. Cedar Rapids slowly returned to its normal rhythm, but the story of Emily and Carl's downfall lingered. At the local diner, patrons would whisper, nod, and even chuckle when the subject came up. I found satisfaction not in their shame, but in the quiet, unshakable dignity I had restored to my own life. One evening, I walked past the mansion one last time. The for sale sign gleamed in the sunset, a symbol of finality. I imagined Emily and Carl peeking through curtains, faces tight with frustration, yet powerless to undo what had been done. I whispered softly to myself, "You thought you owned me, but all along I owned the truth, and that's worth more than any mansion." Returning home, I stepped inside my small, familiar kitchen. The smell of brewing coffee, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant laughter of children playing in the neighborhood, it all felt richer now, more meaningful. Life, in its simplest form, had become my reward. That night, I opened the old journal I'd kept tucked away for decades, jotting a few lines. I survived their contempt. I reclaimed my dignity. And in doing so, I found peace that no mansion, no wealth, no arrogance could ever take from me. It was a poetic justice that didn't require shouting or spectacle. They had lost their mansion, their pride, and the illusion of control. I had gained clarity, peace, and the undeniable truth. Respect is earned, not demanded. And sometimes, life has a way of tipping the scales in your favor. As I closed the journal, I felt the sun's final rays dip behind the horizon. I breathed deeply, savoring the quiet triumph. In that moment, I knew I had not only reclaimed my property, but my life, my peace, and my dignity. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, I would later say on camera, my voice calm and steady. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories. Remember, respect is never given, it's earned. And sometimes, the universe has a funny way of balancing the scales. For the first time in decades, I slept that night without worry, without fear, and without resentment. The mansion may have been their dream, but peace, true peace, was mine.